Can you see that, Ken?
Yes, I got you.
Small crews, efficient production strategies. Okay, so we don't have a lot of folks in the room. So what I'd like to do is just offer, open up that chat box if you want to. And if you want to ask questions along the way, feel free to do that. I'll try to keep it open and look at it so I can see, see the questions come up. So the whole idea behind this presentation is that almost all remodeling companies have small crews, or they use one person, as a crew. And and the other challenge with remodeling quite often is they don't always work together all the time. So it's starting to move toward teams in companies where a lead carpenter has a carpenter and a helper, and they always work together. But the reason why this is developing this way is because the lead carpenter can then manage and work 2 or 3 jobs at one time rather than just one job at a time. And so there's been some evolution going on, but the basic idea is that whenever we do remodeling, it's generally a small team of people that work those jobs. So I want to start with this basic idea of what's the efficiency situation with one man versus multiple, or one person versus multiple people on a job. And it's been shown over and over and over again that one person working on a job is the most cost efficient way to do a project. And it's, per dollar spent, you get more work out of one person than you do out of what it costs you to pay 2 people. Now, in theory, you get more done with 2 people just on the basic, getting it done. But the idea is, are you really getting 100% efficiency out of those 2 people? And so, again, the idea is, how then do we actually get the most you can out of more than one person on a job? Now, there's a lot of reasons why this is the case, and everybody, has thought about this, that knows these things. There's just a tendency for us to talk. And so, for example, you got a lead carpenter working by themselves, you add another carpenter to the job, now there's somebody to talk to. Now there's somebody to talk about football or fishing or whatever it is people like to talk about. And so that in and of itself leads the lead carpenter to be less efficient because now they've got someone to talk to. A more positive thing is the secondary person always needs supervision. Now, even if they're another lead carpenter and they're a fabulous carpenter, that the primary lead or the project manager has to stop what they're doing and tell this other person, this is what I want you to do. So even if it's 15 minutes of instructions, they're both going to become less efficient. Now, generally, it's not 2 highly skilled people. It's generally a highly skilled person and somebody who has lesser skills or lesser ability. And so it takes even more time to either supervise or manage that other person. Now, the other thing that, is probably one of our bigger challenges is that there's just greater opportunity for inefficient use of labor. So, I bought 2 metal board holders so that when I was holding a 16-foot piece of wood on a chop box and cutting a miter or even just cutting a square cut, I didn't have to have a person on the other end holding the end of that board just to, hold it up. But if I have somebody on site, the tendency is, hey, do this, do this, do this. And so I'm asking them on a great amount of time in a great many situations to do something that is less productive than if I had thought about it and perhaps had a tool that would do that and so forth. For some of you that may not know, I worked for a company in Potomac, Maryland for 12 years, and I was a production manager there for a number of years. And I remember being on site one day, and there were 4 people putting a 14 or a 16-foot 1x6 on the side of a fake beam. So one on either end holding it, one in the middle using the nail gun, and the lead carpenter watching. Now, totally inefficient. Now, if I'd have had 2 people on that job, the 2 people would have got it done. But because we had, the lead carpenter said we need more people, we'd thrown some people at the job, but he didn't know how to use them effectively. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. I think the reality too is that in many, many, many cases, things like kitchen cabinets, a lot of times people want to have 2 people on a job site to put in kitchen cabinets. Now, I've put in a lot of kitchens by myself, okay? Now, what tends to happen is there's these pockets of time where we really need that extra set of hands, but then there's pockets when we don't really need those extra set of hands, and especially becomes a problem when we run into an issue, a challenge. Hey, this isn't working very well. So now what do? That helper is standing there watching me try to figure out, like, how do I make this work? And so that's a big challenge as well. And then, you know what? Training takes time and money. So it's not bad. And obviously we need to be training people, but it does take away from our efficiency. And the thing I'd like to say right now to everybody is we ought to have money in a training budget so that when we send someone out to a job site to train, it isn't always reflected in the job cost. Part of that would be reflected in the training budget. Part of it would be reflected in the job cost. But it does, anytime we're training somebody, it does reduce efficiencies. And then I think the last thing is innovation suffers. And I've worked by myself so much that I've just thought of all kinds of creative ways to get things done by myself. And some of it had to do with just there was nobody else available. And so I built an addition for my sister that was 16 by 20. I was going to be working by myself, except for small pockets of time, like getting all the 5/8 plywood up 2 flights and to put on the decking. I had some help, okay? But putting 5/8 decking on a roof pitch of 812, I did it by myself. Now, was it the smartest thing to do? Probably not. I think if I had a company, I would have rather had somebody there to help. But I'm working by myself, so I have to be creative and be safe about how to get these things done. And so when we always have that extra set of hands, we aren't always thinking about creative ways to get things done and get them done safely. So the idea of what I'm going to talk about, maybe for the next 35, 40 minutes, something like that, is that when 2 or 3 people are required on a job site, right? So when we have to have somebody there, now there's a couple of different reasons why we might need somebody on a job site. Number 1, the work requires it. And I've got an example here. We're now doing 2nd floor decking on a 2-floor, 2nd floor addition, right? So it's a really good idea to have 2 people on site, both to carry plywood and to get the decking down safely, right? And then when you move to that, roof decking, that's another part of it. It might be the heavy pantry cabinets on site that we really do need an extra set of hands to move them, although a dolly might do it as well. But the other situation is, we've hired people, and most business owners are trying to keep everybody working 40 hours a week. Now, right now, that's probably not a challenge. There are other times when that's a challenge, but we may choose to put somebody on a job site and say, hey, this is where you're going to be for a couple of days till we get your job ready to go, or we can find a little more efficient place for you. So Efficiencies or the loss of efficiency can really be changed if we use careful execution. So that loss of efficiency can be improved if we put some things into practice. And that's what we're kind of talking about in this presentation. So any of you that have heard me speak before, you've probably heard me talk about planning. And these small projects really require more planning than big projects. Now, big projects typically get a lot of planning because everybody goes like, wow, this is a big project, we better plan well. And the smaller projects, we tend to rush into them and we say things like, man, I've done 50 kitchens, this one is just another kitchen, or 100 bathrooms, this is just another bathroom, or you know what, we just do this kind of work all the time, and so it's just another project. And so we commonly call this a 3-week look ahead or daily planning. And I've listed some of the reasons why I think this is particularly important when we're dealing with a small crew, 1 or 2 or 3 people. So if we don't look ahead, typically there isn't anyone that we can just send. In other words, we don't have a free set of hands. Typically, if we've got 2 people on the job site, they're there for a reason, and to send them away just lessens our efficiency. And if somebody's gone, it does lessen the efficiency. Usually there's less slop, if you will, in the budget. In other words, the jobs are estimated and processed very, very tightly. And then the other thing is that jobs, usually these smaller jobs, have less fill-in work. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. But one of the really incredible efficiencies for small crews is to have a list of fill-in work that says, you know, when someone isn't effectively working, they can do these 5 things. And if we've got that list continually running, it lessens the impact of somebody waiting for something to be done. And so this idea of the daily planning is absolutely critical, and particularly as we're talking about these small crews. So I'm going to give you just a framework for this, and then I want to give you some specifics in a minute. So one of the reasons why it's such a big deal as a daily event is that you want to have what I'm calling the cascade event. So basically, when I look at it from a daily perspective, I say, what do I want to get done today? And then I say, what about 2 days from now? But what about 4 days from now? What about a week from now? What about 2 weeks and even 3 weeks out, depending on the size of the project? So what happens is at some point in time, the stuff that you put into 3 weeks out becomes 2 weeks, becomes next week, becomes now it's going to happen. And so by doing that, the planning is not as strenuous every single day. So if you're doing it every day, you can probably do it in 15 or 20 minutes of a regular day. If you wait and try to plan everything out for a whole week, it's going to take more time to do that. So I really like this cascading event. I really like checklists, and you know, anybody that's heard me speak before knows that checklists help you remember things. And so what I'm proposing is that you take the next slide and you say, okay, these are the 5 or 6 things that I want to think about every time I do daily planning. And you might add something to it, you might take something away from it. But if you use it as a checklist, then as you plan, you don't forget to do something. And that's a really critical part of this, because if you forget things, then obviously they catch up with you and impact you greatly. Use whatever medium is fine with you. I'm kind of old school, so I will use a spiral binder. I'll use my little checklist, and then I'll go in and I'll have each page will be a day in a spiral notebook. I kind of like those. Some people might like a tablet, and then they can save information that way. whatever's comfortable for you, use that. Get in the habit, make it every single day. I like the afternoon. You know, from my vantage point, the afternoon is best for anybody in terms of planning for the next few days. You're a lot, you know, if you're a lead carpenter, you're kind of done with your tasks for today. And now you have some time to focus on, all right, what did I get done? So what do I have coming up? So one of the important things to remember is the time frames may vary. So one of the things that may take a lot of time is just getting ready for your trade rough-ins. So there may be a lot of planning. It may take you a couple hours on one day to get ready for your trade rough-ins. But other days, it may only be 15, 20 minutes. And so don't feel like it's going to be exactly the same thing on every day. Now, I don't think I have it in this presentation, but I will share this. I do think you ought to fix a time frame. So the time frame, you ought to say, I'm going to spend 15 minutes, because what tends to happen is you start thinking about stuff, and we'll write down, in my case, write it down on a piece of paper, the 10 things that come to mind immediately. But if I say I'm going to spend 15 minutes at it, when I'm done with those first 10 things, I may have only used 2 minutes. Now I have 8 minutes to dig in. And by digging into the plans, the scope, trade contractor, all those kinds of things, by digging in, I find things that could become real problems down the road if I don't deal with them. And then the key is think about what your challenges are for that day. So it's pretty obvious. These are like the 6 things that are really important for you to think about. Number one, and this is where we get into that idea of the small crew, like labor. Who do I want on site, and how long am I going to have them here, and what exactly do I want them to do? Now, this gets into that, like, how do you use your people on site? So having a concrete list. So for example, my name's Tim, right? I'm the lead carpenter. If I want Bill to be on my site for 2 days, I'm going to make a list of the 10 things that I want Bill to get done in the 2 days that he's there. I don't want him to show up and just all he has to do is kind of do whatever I tell him to do. I'm going to have a list. Now, some of that list is going to be help Tim with the rafters, right? And I might even say, you know, bring all the material from the front yard while Tim lays out the first rafter, help Tim cut rafters, you know, all of those kinds of things. Now, 2 things happen here. If that list is there, then all Bill has to do while he's working for me on site, like let's just suppose the client comes up to me and says, Tim, I have to talk to you. And I'm talking to the client for half an hour. What's Bill going to be doing? If he's just standing around waiting for me to finish the conversation, then I've wasted a half an hour of his time. But I can say, hey, Bill, look at your list. I know there's a couple of things you can get done on there while I'm talking with Mrs. Smith, right? So that's a real key to this thing, is thinking about who's going to do what, how are they going to get that stuff done, and do I have the right materials and so forth for them. The other thing it does, and I'll deal with this in a few minutes as well, but it sets goals, right? It gives Bill some goals to say, you're going to be here for 2 days, and for this to be successful, you will have completed these 8 things while you're here. Okay. Now, again, some of them's going to be helping me. That's part of the reason why he's there. But some of them's going to be things that he's going to do independently of me while he's there. Material lists, making material lists. And we talked about this a little bit in the previous seminar, but right now there's materials that we used to be able to get in 2 days, and we can't get them for a week now. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging everybody to do is don't get caught short-sighted. Start making these material lists as you go through. So for example, if your deck is going to start supposedly in 3 weeks, take the time to make that material list, talk with your supplier and say, can I get this stuff immediately? If not, order what takes 3 weeks to get, and then, you know, the other stuff that you can get immediately, you wait and order for when you can actually get it. But making material lists and keeping from going to the lumber yard is huge, right? Lumberyard trips are huge net profit killers. And so you want to be looking carefully at what materials do I need? How are we going to use them? How long do they have to get here? Another thing that you want to be looking at is, what are questions that I need to ask my team? Now, if you do design build, the tendency is to say the designer is in-house. If I have a question, I just call them up and get an answer. But you know what? If you don't find that question a couple of days ahead and ask the designer a couple of days ahead, now Bill is standing there waiting for you to get a decision. That's a waste of time. And so by planning ahead, you want to look ahead. You want to look ahead at least a week and say, all right, I'm going to be building the deck, but you know what? I don't see a detail on the railing. What do they want the railing to look like? Right? So you send a note to the designer, say, please send me a detail on the railing. I want to make sure I have it so that when I get to building the deck, I'm super, super efficient. Another one of the things that quite often kills people is client decisions. When do we need to get those made? And what are they? Now, you know, in the perfect world, all the decisions are made, right? But not always. And let me tell you something, if you're waiting on your designers to make sure the client gets decisions made, they are working on 6 or 7 other jobs. And so quite often it will slip their mind. So when you're on site, you want to make sure that you're thinking like, what do I need to talk to the client about? What do I need to talk to the designer about to get these decisions made? And you want to be thinking 2 to 3 weeks before the deadline, you start talking to the clients. Trade contractors, you're making your calls. Everybody knows this. It's a little harder now. Everybody's swamped with work. So what are you doing? You're making your calls during this time. Hey, Bill, you're a plumber, or just say Joe, the plumber. You know, just calling to confirm that you're going to be here next Monday. I will be ready. And you'll be getting this, this, and this done. And then are there any tools or other things that you need to have on site to make sure the work goes very, very well? So this is kind of the basic agenda that you would have in your planning checklist. And by doing this, when you have more than just one person on site, you're better able to make sure that second or third person is effectively working. Now, again, most of this stuff right here we've kind of hit. By planning ahead, it allows you to have the right materials, the right tools. Questions are answered early. I put some things in red here so that, you know, have you ever gotten to that point at the end of the day? I know you have. I have, where you've got about 45 minutes of time, and it doesn't really take 45 minutes to clean up the job, but it's like, okay, what are we going to do now? Right? Well, if you have a list of tasks going on, then you can just knock out a couple of little things in that 15 or 20 minutes and then start cleaning up. We can have alternating tasks for somebody. So in other words, by doing the planning ahead and we have this list of tasks, if Bill gets to doing something and he runs out of materials for that task, what? Rather than running off to the lumberyard and picking up more stuff, he can now shift to another task where you have materials on site, get those other materials brought on site. And then the other thing is just thinking of innovative ways to get things done. So my favorite example of this happens to be me. I was on a job in Washington, D.C., near American University, where we had to build a dormer in a slate roof. And I'm supposed to cut a hole in a slate roof. And I'm thinking, like, how am I going to do that without setting up all kinds of scaffolding and so forth like that on the back of the house? And I figured out that I could go from the inside, cut a hole big enough to push my body through and start taking slate off, right? And I just started stacking it up in the attic so it could be used later by the roofer to roof the dormer and fill back in where we had to take out. And as the hole got bigger, I could cut more and more out. And so I managed to build this dormer without ever setting up scaffolding on the back of the house. Now, once the roofer got in, they had to figure out their own ways because we didn't want them just climbing in and out the window the whole time. And slate roof makes that a little more difficult. But by planning ahead, I was able to think of something innovative so that I was able to use my time more effectively in that situation. Now, so that's planning ahead. Think about adopting the one-man crew for everybody on the site. Now, what this basically means is that if I'm going to have Bill on site to help me carry heavy cabinets when I need them, I am also thinking that at times Bill will be his own crew. And so now the critical part of this is Bill has to be able to do some things that I want him to do. So for example, I might be setting kitchen cabinets and doing that mostly on my own, but when it comes time for me to haul those heavy pantry cabinets, Bill is available. But in the meantime, I've got Bill hanging doors, running trim, doing other things in the space, in the space that we're working in. Obviously, Bill has to have his own tools, right? It's just insane to me that they have one chop box on a job or one skill saw. And so what do you have? You have people standing around waiting for someone else to get done using the tool. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, but making sure that everybody has their own tools is a pretty big deal. Now, this last bullet point here is what I'm sharing with Bill is, okay, Bill, I want you to trim this room. Let's just pretend I'm in the kitchen doing cabinets. There's another room that we were working in, like maybe the dining room. Bill, you're going to be trimming in here, crown mold, baseboard, chair rail, wainscoting, whatever it is goes in there. And my budget allows you 4 hours to get this done or 8 hours to get this done. Basically setting goals for the other person on your crew. Now, if it's 8 hours and they're going to be helping you for a couple of those hours, hopefully you've got them set up to be there the next day, and then you have another task for them to do for the rest of that day. So the idea here is that we stick with the one-person crew as much as possible, but because you've got two air quote crews going on, now they can help each other when it's absolutely necessary. Okay? So that's another kind of trick to it. I've already mentioned lists. One of the things that has been a truly efficient thing for me to do, and just in case you didn't know, back in 2009, I started remodeling again. People weren't paying me to talk, and so I had to make a living, and so I went out and remodeled. And one of the things I did very effectively was to make lists of what I've got to get done. And this works very, very well, like I said, for that small crew. But the way I would do it is I would make a running list. And one of our lead carpenters at Hopkins and Porter years ago, this is a truly effective way that he worked as well. Beginning of the job, just started making a list. Here's what I'm going to be accomplishing. And then as he went through the whole project, then it became the completion list. And as I indicated before, on that list is going to be all kinds of little items that can be used for fill-in, that can be done whenever somebody has a few minutes. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this. Some companies use a whiteboard on site, a dry erase board, so you can just keep the list going and maybe put people's names on it. Or perhaps you have it set up at a little table or something like that where you have a paper list. The other thing that really helps with this is that this becomes a place where anybody can write something down that needs to be remembered. So I know everybody listening has had this experience, right? Somebody says they're done. They know there's one more doorknob that has to be done or one more door stopper, but they don't have it, but they never write it down. And so then what happens? We go through the whole job, go through that completion phase, and it becomes part of that final list, which becomes longer and more costly to get done. So having lists makes it really, really work well in terms of making sure things don't get forgotten. Now, if I've got any lead carpenters on this call, you can start jumping up and down and talking about, yay, Tim. But here's the deal. Working with small crews, we need to be investing in tools. Every company needs tool allowances or tool budgets or whatever. Now, I believe in our country, there was a time, and it might have been right after World War II, when all the servicemen were coming back from, being overseas, and we had the big housing boom, that probably labor was less expensive than tools. Nowadays, tools are less expensive in the long run than labor. Now, some of the tools are really expensive, and you have to really think about, like, is that worth it? But in general, tools make things move and get done much more quickly. And so I'm just going to encourage you, with small crews, just buy the tools that you need to make the jobs run more effectively. Now, they can slow you down if you don't know how to use them. So what? We need to make sure we take the time to set the tools up properly, right? And then take the time to learn how to use them efficiently. And, there's always instruction guides with it. There are books, there are other carpenters. And I'll just give a shout out to Gary Katz, who has videos and training. He has all these amazing little ways to just use, like a chop box with stops, to be more efficient on the job. KATZ, I believe, is how he spells it. But he's got videos that deal with trim particularly. Some other people deal with framing, things like that. But the more you can get that in front of people to increase efficiency, the better off you're going to be. Now, typically, if I was doing this with a full audience, I would ask, what are some of the things that have made you more efficient? And you come up with all kinds of different things, but just, these are kind of big ticket items. This saw stand for a miter box, instead of setting up planks and boards and wooden sawhorses, buy the saw stand, get it so that it's set up as you need it to. My brother is a carpenter in the DC area. He probably some of you have seen, he used to drive an old Volkswagen bus, loved to go to T.W. Perry's. But one of his big claims to fame was that because he drove this old Volkswagen bus, he had to take all his tools into every job. Otherwise, they would disappear, as soon as he left his bus. So he had tool carts. Instead of carrying one box at a time, he moved all his tools in a matter of just a few minutes by putting them on dollies. A door stand, a coping jig, a laser level can be an amazing tool to speed things up. Clamps, you can never have enough clamps, and so on and so on and so on. Now, I ran into this tool somewhere where they, obviously it's a fake mock-up, but they were claiming that you could nail off fence boards from 100 yards. So, hopefully just add a little joke here to the presentation. Now, we're getting down towards the end of the presentation here, but one of the things to think about with small crews is just start thinking about, what are some things that I can do that are innovations? And one of the things I realized a while back was that almost all of us, we don't think about innovation. We think about, like, this is how I do this. And so one of the things I'd encourage you to do is stop and go, like, all right, can I do this task a little more efficiently? And if I have somebody helping me, what's the way in which that's going to be more efficient? And so take some time to plan and think out efficiencies on site. Now, the big deal with this is how do we do it safely? And I've done some pretty stupid things in my life in terms that, I just basically, I'm lucky I didn't get killed on the job site. So we don't want anyone taking that risk for the sake of efficiency. So we want you to be thinking, what are the things that I need to do that makes it safe for me and for my team? Now, again, if we were in an environment where we could have this conversation, I quite often ask people, like, what are some of the stupid things I've done, right? So again, I just want to emphasize that just because we're talking about efficiencies and a small crew, don't stop thinking safety, okay? Know when to say no, know when you need to have somebody on your crew. Now, I mentioned I would get to this. Goals are huge, and I'm a big fan of a lead carpenter bringing their team together. If you're going to have 2 people on your job site for a week, bring that team together first thing Monday morning and set goals. If you're going to have people for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, set weekly goals, okay? Because that will help people get in the mindset of helping you to get things done. You never want to leave team members in the dark about what you want to accomplish, because they can help you accomplish it. And in many cases, you can say, all right, our goal for today is to get this done. How do you think you can help me make that happen? And they start thinking about how to be more efficient. Same thing with weekly goals. So be realistic, communicate clearly, perhaps have a weekly huddle, especially if you're going to have more than yourself working on a job site for an extended period of time. As I mentioned, we're winding down here, but this is a big deal too. Like, cross-train people to be more effective at all tasks. It just bothers me a little bit. Like, I was with a company recently where some of their carpenters are really good at framing and some are really good at trim. And so what happens is the project managers are always wanting the really good framers when their job is in framing, and the really good trimmers when their job is in trim, but they're not always available. And so what do you have? You have people who aren't as good framing and obviously are going to be less efficient. And so take the time to teach people, train people on how to be efficient in framing. What makes that person very efficient when they frame, that we can train other people to do that? What makes that person who's really good at trimming efficiently? What makes them efficient? And can we train other people? It has to be deliberate. We have to put people in those situations where they're going to learn. We have to tell people, we're putting you in there to learn. You're not going there just to haul lumber. You're going there to learn. We have to tell the person that's training to teach them as opposed to just getting it done. We need to expect learning from our team. So if you're a manager listening in on this, you should always be expressing, we expect people to learn. And then one of the things that I realized about, training many, many years ago is it's one thing to train people how to flash a window. It's another thing to train them about how water works. And if you train people to think about the many different ways that water travels, as a moisture for moisture barriers, as a drip, as capillary action, as wind-blown action, if you train somebody to think that way, they can flash anything, right? So when they get to something where they've never done it before, then they're going to be able to do it. So if you train people only to flash a window this way, and then they run, oh, what about this situation? I don't know how to do this. It's going to be more difficult for them to figure it out than if you train them to think about why we flash the way we do or how water works, right? The same thing would be true like path loads. I'm not talking about engineering, discussions, but everybody that's working on framing should know about path loads so they know how to frame. Otherwise, they're going to make some mistakes that are going to cost you in the long run. So cross-training people, really, really big. Obviously, for small projects, they need to know a little bit about electrical and plumbing as well, if nothing else, just to be able to shut stuff off to make sure that everything is safe. And then finally, now this may be a no-brainer for everybody, but you know what? We just need to leave people on the job, you know, till the phase is done. Stop moving people all around. It's crazy. Like I said, if you've got a pool of 5 or 6 people that move around job to job and you're moving them every other day, it's going to be a totally inefficient use of their time. So put them on a job. If they're going to be there for the framing, let them stay till the end of the framing. If they're going to start the trim, leave them there till the end of the trim. Figure out your schedule for how you use people so that they get to stay and work on the job. Okay, so I think we got about 10 minutes here or so, maybe 8 minutes actually, to answer any questions. This is my contact information, tim@remodelersadvantage.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you have other questions you want to ask me, maybe you want to ask me something in private. I joke about the fact that I'll answer almost any question except, am I getting paid enough? Because I sure don't know, right? So there's my phone number. I truly invite you to join in the podcast. We have a lot of fun. It's just just one of those things where we enjoy that process. And then I have a newsletter that talks about production management and so forth like that. So I'm going to invite Ken, my moderator, back in here. And if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and end the share.